Good evening and welcome to Nye County. I'm your host, Thomas Gibson, local attorney and conscience of the county. And my guests with me tonight are Dwight Lilly to my far left, and to my immediate left is Kenny Bent. And tonight we're going to be discussing Nye County water rights, particularly water issues, mainly here in the Pahrump area, but we're going to be discussing water, private wells and corporate interests in the water that is also in our area. And we'll start with Dwight. And Dwight, what can you tell us about what the hot issues are here?
Well, the hot issue is misinformation, I would say, is a key hot issue. In order to find out about water rights, private water rights for their wells, the laws and that, you have to be a detective, because here in Nye County in Basin 162, and by the way, folks, Basin 162 is the water basin that you here in Pahrump are taking your water from. It's been hidden somewhat, and there's been a lot of misinformation. There was, up until recently, if you went to the internet and looked up Pahrump, Nevada, you were being told that we sit upon the third largest water aquifer in the United States. But if you look into it closer, we don't even sit on the third largest water aquifer in the state of Nevada. Now, this is disturbing to people. It disturbed me when I went to a meeting one time a couple of years ago, and the state water engineer was there, and he flat told all of those in attendance that he had the power, if he so chose, to come in and tell the private well owners they had to quit pumping water so that those with senior water rights would be able to pump water. And that, I think, shocked everybody at that meeting that wasn't aware, because most people have never heard of the terms senior water rights or beneficial use, or the various terms that have to go with water law in the state of Nevada. Now, what has transpired since then is the state engineer's attempt to legislate himself into the actual power to do what he said he could do. Because as people looked into it, he doesn't have the authority to come in here and do anything with groundwater. He has the authority to manage water that's on the surface but here in Pahrump, we don't. I don't think we have a stream, do we, in Pahrump?
Only when it rains.
Haven't been out fly fishing lately. So the legislative effort was turned back, and the state engineer is trying to get the authority to come in and control the wells. And it's just a big can of worms, Tom, because, again, misinformation. Now, the information was there. I call it hiding in plain sight. Going back into the early 70s, the state engineer and the community here, leaders, knew that there was only enough water for 27,000 people in this valley. It goes by the perennial yield is how they determine this, how much water gets recharged into the ground underneath us so that we can draw from it. And that number has, it's fluctuated. Some people say it's 12,000 acre feet a year. Some people say it's 20,000 acre feet a year. But the fact remains that it's over allocated, and there are wells in the south end of Pahrump that are dropping 2 feet per year in depth. So anyway, I could have brought 5 boxes of information in here, but I think that kind of gives an overview. It's a battle for private well owners against corporate interests, and you know, we're out here fighting for the little guy.
And you've actually been to many of the state legislator conferences on this, correct?
Yes, there was a group of us that Kenny was among us, that we attended the legislative sessions on what was SB 65 and SB 81. Those are Senate bills that the state engineer had, through his office, introduced in order to jury-rig the state NRS, I guess is the best word to say it, to give him the power and authority to come in here and tell people that they had to cut back on their water use. Now, one important figure to remember, Tom, is that a lot of people have acreage here. And A private well is allowed up to 2,000 gallons a day of water for use. Now, if you have horses and livestock and gardens and landscaping and trees, you need sufficient water. This is not a town of subdivisions, however, it's headed that way, if the builders would get their way. We are a rural community. So the thought of cutting back, which is, here's the statistic that he comes up with. He wants to cut back the 2,000 gallons a day to under 500 gallons a day, which that means cut your trees down, remove your landscaping, get rid of your chickens, goats, and horses, and forget about gardening.
Now, let me ask you this. What, for our viewers, what is the state engineer, or who is the state engineer, and what is his function?
The state engineer works for the Department of Resources, Water...
Natural resources.
Yeah, natural resources for the state. His job is to oversee the state's water supply, I guess is what you basically say. He's the governing head. He's appointed by the governor, I should say. And if you want to drill a well, for example, you go through his office, you apply to get permission to do that. If you want to secure water rights, you apply through, I guess what I'd say is he's the working tool of the state as far as water goes, except he does have limited authority. He does not have unlimited authority.
And beneficial use, is that a key term they use?
Beneficial
not
use.
much anymore.
No, well, they don't like that term, beneficial
It's actually,
use.
historically, it's the cornerstone of prior appropriation doctrine, that water law.
When I was in law school, I took water law, and beneficial use was, again, that was a buzzword for what is required in order to obtain and maintain your water rights.
Yeah,
well, keep in mind it was considered the public's water. In order to gain access to the public's water, you got to put it to beneficial use.
For people that don't know, who owns the water in the state?
Who owns the water? 2 million acres of it belongs to the patented land,
But I mean, the state, as far as I understand, the state owns the water. Even if it's kind of like even if you had a pond in your backyard, in theory, that's their water, and that's why they get so bent out of shape.
Not
actually,
quite.
it belongs to the public. That's their.
Yeah, the state's a government. The public actually owns the water.
Yeah.
Right, but what I'm saying is, but the public owns your water indirectly.
Well, you're getting into an area that I think is important to cover here, because the argument gets back to what I said earlier. The water underneath the
Belongs
person's
to the
property has been ruled by the state Supreme Court, belongs to the property. So if you bought a 1 acre plot of land, the water that's mixed with the soil underneath the property, there's no way to just separate the two. So in a sense, it belongs to that piece of property.
That's true in regard to the 2 million acres that were patented here.
Exactly.
Early on. That was under 1880, that act went into place.
But it's been upheld by the courts too.
It has, but keep in mind, most all the tons and tons and tons of decisions on water rights in court have been basically applied to things that's either fully surface water, artesian water, or to where you go in between groundwater and surface water,
correct.
as if you have a well next to a river. Yes, that will have an effect and draw down the surface water. So there's numerous rulings on that. There's only a couple that I'm aware of that were specifically to percolating groundwater. But yeah, the interesting thing is that some of the land, 2 million acres in the state, that water is actually our tenants to the land by patent, by virtue of patent. And as you probably understand, most attorneys would, that there's no interest in equity that can actually break a patent. And most of this was done prior to the, let's just say, call it pre-statutory, before the state water engineer got into the mix.
There's nothing that the government can't do or the courts won't do if there's enough of an interest in it.
Well, we're talking about huge billions and billions of dollars statewide of the interest. And across the globe, you're seeing a fight for who will control water. One of the interesting aspects in this plan that's coming out actually paves a way to privatize which once was the public's water. And as there again, as you see across the globe, you have a lot of big water companies that are actually in the business of owning water in various countries. So this is a real slippery slope we're stepping on.
Right, and my understanding is I'm talking in California. You know, they're the state, the government is commandeering more and more water from the farmers who at one time had a little more ownership control over their water there.
Yeah, actually, they were. They told them even the senior water rights can, you know, hey, you're out of here. So yeah, it's that what's going on over there has made a lot of people nervous here too, and there's a lot of this is basically don't let a good crisis go to waste. So they're jumping in and thinking that they're going to run through legislation that's beneficial to everybody, when really it comes down to whether individuals will be able to maintain an independent lifestyle, or whether largely the utility companies will control everything.
I think you hit on a good point when you mentioned the word senior as far as water rights could go, because that seems to be a major issue here, Tom. The state water engineer over-allocated our basin by 5 times the amount of water that's available. And the early farmers that were here were granted water rights so that they could farm. And that was and the state engineer had determined that that was a beneficial use of the water. But what transpired is that they stopped farming and they took those water rights and moved them to developments and have tried to maintain that they have the priority date that goes back when they first got the water rights, when that property first was farmed, which then they come forward and tell a private well owner that your priority date is when your well was drilled. Well, we ascertained that that's not true. So there's an actual arguments going on as to what this priority date is, and then it's coupled in, like I say, if you took the amount of what's called paper water rights, these are rights that have never been put to beneficial use. There's over $127 million of them.
Gearing down for a commercial break, and we'll be back
in
about 2 minutes.
Okay.